I'll say good morning to everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is John Grubb, and I am I'm wearing a couple of hats this morning. First of all, I'm the Vice President of VISOA, and I'm also the Business Member Chair. But the other part of it is that I have been a business member of VISOA for about 16 years. I'm one of the old timers. And I've been doing business with Strata Corporations for all of that time. My business operates almost exclusively with Strata Corporations. So I've gotten to know a little bit about Strata Corporations in general. And sometimes I think business members find them a little challenging to, first of all, even get in contact with if they want to do business. And second of all, challenging to understand enough about the business of Strata Corporations to know that there's a process that the Strata owners have to follow that isn't really conducive to making quick decisions. So, welcome. What we're gonna try and cover today is a bit about that very business model of Strata Corporations and around who makes the decisions. We're going to try and show you what the difference between their annual operations and service contracts and so on are different, or how they're different to periodic large projects, and how those are funded, and how stratas have to operate within their annual budgets and their capital budgets. And we're going to try to cover a little bit about the difference between contracting and consulting. And sometimes when stratas are asking questions about things, they're not asking really a contractor for a quote. They're asking a contractor to try and help them figure out what it is they want. So we'll talk about that a little later too. So Strata Corporations can be described as a fourth level of government. They operate in a really quite a raw democratic form, where one would think that there's a certain, there's a decision maker, that the council are decision makers. And in fact, in some cases they are. When an operating budget is set and the owners vote on that operating budget, it is the council's duty to follow along and manage the day-to-day business of operating a building or a property. It is really council's most significant business, although oftentimes it gets off into politics and other things, and the management of people living together. And this, of course, is one of the interesting parts about working and living in Strata Corporations or with Strata Corporations. But I'll bring it back to that point, is that it's actually the owners as a group that have to make decisions. So they make a single decision for a year's worth of operating budget, and the council goes about the business of managing the building, doing all of those normal things that buildings need, and cleaning and garbage and all of those interesting things that just operating a building requires. But then there are larger projects, and of course we all go through that process where even a single family homeowner, every once in a while you got to paint the exterior of your house, or you've got to put a new roof on it, or you choose to upgrade your windows, or other things like that. Stratas have to do the same thing. They operate in the best. Councils must operate in the best interests of the owners, and it's their obligation and duty to repair and maintain the building. But ultimately, much of that is governed by the Strata Property Act. But ultimately, the owners have to decide. It's not a single decision that a council can make to say, okay, well, we're just going to paint the outside of the building and we'll move on with that. It's the owners choosing as a group to paint that and go through that process. So annual maintenance is funded from the operating budget, and it's approved by the owners at the annual general meeting, among other things. And then council is directed to go about the business of managing that. So council gets to choose who they hire, how much they're going to spend, as long as it's within that budget, to do whatever it is that they have to go through to manage and maintain the property. And that can include things like annual service contracts. I mean, we can get into a contractual arrangement for waste removal and groundskeeping, janitorial, mandatory elevator maintenance, mandatory life safety system maintenance and testing and so on. All of those are often handled as an annual service contract. And if you're in the maintenance industry, you're probably quite familiar with all of these. There are lots of things about a business going about the business of a strata corporation that it is just that. It is a business, and sometimes the owners and the council struggle with that. In my experience, in actually seeing that this isn't a house, this isn't their home, or a house like they're living in their own single family dwelling where they can choose to do or not. This is a business that council is required under the law, under the Strata Property Act, to repair and maintain. So they aren't allowed to just sit and do nothing. But there are many stories of councils and owners groups who actually don't really fully understand that the business of council and the business of the Strata Corporation is to repair and maintain and move forward with all of the things that keep a building alive and healthy and all of those good things. There are the other things that in some cases can be somewhat optional. Window cleaning. Does an owner clean their own windows, or does the strata take the responsibility on and manage the window cleaning? Chimney inspection and cleaning. It can be a little challenging. There's many who say, well, I don't use my chimney, so I don't want to spend any money on having it inspected and cleaned. Oftentimes, the owners group will decide, okay, well, we'll let the Strata Corporation manage that. So it could be that if you're a chimney inspection and cleaning service, you're talking to either a single owner, or you could be talking to council. And just if you're talking to a single owner, he's not acting on behalf of the Strata Corporation at all. He's simply doing what the Strata Corporation has told him he's supposed to do. And it can change from one strata property to the next. They don't always have to operate the same way. Gutter cleaning, well, we all know that we need to clean our gutters, but it's amazing the number of councils and owners groups who forget about that until, it's a panic time because something's backing up and water's going where it shouldn't. Roof inspections. Some councils are extremely good about having their roofs inspected on an annual basis and making sure that things are working properly up there. Our first line of defense against the weather. Carpet cleaning. Some people feel that that's not entirely necessary. This, of course, is in common areas and in condo buildings rather than townhouses. But some feel it's important, others don't. When you come right down to it, carpets in a building like a condominium building are more akin to a commercial operation than they are to residential. So where you might choose in your own residence to not clean carpets every year, it's really kind of important that carpets get cleaned annually and that the Strata Corporation looks after that. Repair and maintenance, it's really important. And those minor repairs. This is all stuff that comes under the heading of the operations budget, the annual operations budget. But then we get into larger projects, and some of you as business members are familiar with this to the degree that this is where your business lies. But how do you get to the Strata Corporation? How do you speak to the decision makers? Well, the short answer is, once again, you're not really speaking to the decision makers if you're calling or you're talking to a council member. All he or she can do, is take the information that you can provide, take it to council, and then ultimately take it back to owners. So Capital projects require the approval of owners at a general meeting of one kind or another, either a special general meeting or an annual general meeting. And capital monies come from a couple of different sources, potentially. I think you may all have heard of the capital or a contingency reserve fund, a CRF. And it's one of my pet peeves because the Strata Property Act insists on calling it a contingency reserve fund as though it's a fund that can be used for emergencies. In fact, it's a capital reserve fund. And this is where strata corporations, if they're planning well for their future, this is where they're putting their money in order to save up for to fund a certain project, like a replacement of a roof or painting the exteriors or any number of periodic projects. This is funding used for things that happen less often than once per year. So less often than every 2 to 5 to 7. Well, roofing can be 25 to 30 years, as some of you know. The funding for that is almost a separate budget when the owners get together and meet at an AGM. They decide on an operating budget, but they also decide on a capital budget. How much money are they going to put aside in their capital reserve fund in order to save up for things that are going to come at them? The alternative way to fund larger projects is by special levy. And this is used particularly when they don't have enough money in their capital reserve to fund the entire budget. So not only will they take funds from the capital reserve, they'll ask each owner to pull out their checkbook and pay by just pulling money out of their bank in whatever way they can. And I think most of us have heard horror stories about huge levies because, oh my goodness me, we have to remediate the exterior of our building. We have to strip the cladding off and redo it completely and put it back together again. And we've all seen buildings that have been wrapped up in mesh and netting for months at a time while that goes on. It started a long time ago with the leaky condo crisis, and to be honest with you, as a building professional, there's not a single building I've ever worked in that didn't leak in one form or another. That's just part and parcel of them. They're not perfect. So to assign it all to a leaky condo and say that the commercial building right next door to it wouldn't leak because it's a commercial building is a fallacy. It's not. That commercial building leaks as much and has just as much issue in having to deal with the day-to-day effort to stop it from leaking. Nonetheless, special levies or capital reserves, the owners have to pay that money one way or another. Well-prepared strata corporations will have a healthy reserve fund. Others tend to kind of fly by the seat of their pants, and they use special levies as a common method of funding larger capital projects when they come down the line. And one of the other things about strata corporations is they can rarely just jump into that large project. Oftentimes they require funding in order to plan and develop that project, to figure out what it is they want to buy. So the process can take a fair amount of time in trying to make it palatable to the owners, get them to agree on exactly what it is they want to do or need to do or what they want to purchase, and then to move forward to a point where they can actually vote on funding that project. And I hope that doesn't sound too confusing, but there really is a two-step process for strata corporations when they're going into large projects. So oftentimes they'll phone up a contractor because they don't know where else to go in order to, well, let's take a roof, for example. Oftentimes roofing contractors will The owners of Strata will phone up. Council will phone three guys because we need 3 quotes. And the point here is when they phone somebody for a quote, well, the question really should be, what is it that they really mean? Are they trying to develop the major project? Or are they asking you, are they all fully prepared? They know what they want. Are they asking you to bid on it? And it's a question that if you ask that up front of them, they may come back with that, well, we're trying to figure out where we're going or what we're doing. And that's, from your perspective as a business, that's a different kettle of fish than it is to say, well, we want you to quote on this, and say, hand you a bid package with all of the tender documentation and the information there to say, this is what we want. These are the conditions under which we want you to do this work, or we want you to price this work. And they're asking you to join in a competitive bid process. So the question for you when somebody phones up out of the blue and says, well, gee, we'd like you to give us a quote on this is, well, what is it that you're trying to do? Are you trying to develop this project? Do you really know what you want? Or are you all prepared and are you ready to come right out of the gate and move forward with the business? So consulting is a different ball of wax. I'm a consultant. I'm not a contractor. So I understand the difference between it. But oftentimes the council members that you might be talking to, they don't understand and appreciate that calling a contractor isn't necessarily what they need at that point. They need a consultant. And I'm not suggesting that contractors can't be consultants. They can. But it is, once again, back to that question. Are you ready to go with a project, or are you trying to develop that project? Because if you're ready to go, then I'm a contractor. If you're just trying to develop it, well, you're asking me to be a consultant. And that's a decision that each business member has to make. That's a business decision that you want to, well, if you choose to do it, it's a somewhat different approach. And as I say, you've got to ask yourselves, do you want to be that consultant? So there is a potential as a contractor that if somebody is wanting you to act as a consultant, that there may be a conflict of interest. Because as a contractor, you have a product or a service that you want to sell. And it's not as though you want to spend a whole lot of time discussing the options or the services or the products that your competitors want to sell. That's not in your best interest for sure. But if that's the question that's being asked, as a consultant, your job is to be a third-party, independent individual or company and help the owners figure out what they want. And obviously, if you're a professional in any given field, you're going to bring your own biases with that. But essentially, you have to look at a number of different options and help them figure out what's available. So it's a question for you as contractors and business members or business owners to try to decide whether you want to be that consultant and are prepared to work with a client for a while to sort through and figure out what they want, or whether it's, we're in the business of replacing roofs. When you figure it out, you come and talk to us and we'll move forward. That's probably a poor example because I don't know of a roofer in the industry who would turn down and walk away from someone who had asked them for a quote. The point here is, what are they quoting on, and how do you compare apples and apples and ensure that? So if a tender document is put together clearly and concisely, then you know that any number of roofing contractors are going to be bidding on the same process or on the same requirements. Whereas if you just ask for, they're just asking for 3 quotes, well, it's 3 quotes on what? Exactly. What kind of roof do you want? How far do you want to go with that? Here we are again as the difference between a contractor and a consultant. So that coming back to that, getting 3 quotes, strata councils are obliged to act in the best interests of the owners. This is a requirement under the Strata Property Act. They really have a fiduciary duty to everybody to make sure that they're acting clearly and transparently, that they're trying to do the best. And oftentimes that simply means to them getting 3 quotes. And once again, we get back to that whole idea of it's simple enough when you want to get, if you want to get some carpet cleaning done, to call on 3 different carpet companies and say, okay, well, this is what I want. Or can you bid on, or can you quote me on this? Simple enough. It's very straightforward. But when we get into the larger projects, much more complex ones, it's not as easy as that. And getting 3 quotes is a bit challenging. And once again, we get back to the whole idea of, do the owners really know what they want? Does council really know what they want? And what are they asking you for? Is it a quote? Or is it some more information on what options they might have? So while councils might think that getting 3 quotes provides that level of transparency to allow them to work with their owners, it's an internal thing. It doesn't necessarily help the process along. Once again, do they really know what they want? And it's an important question as a business trying to operate with strata corporations. It's an important question to ask. First and foremost, have you settled on a certain format, or have you settled on a certain kind of service? Is this what you want, or are you looking for something else? Are you looking for something to try and support the process, support the owners in what they're doing? Or are you already at that decision, and that decision has already been made, and we're going to move forward with a project? Here it is. If that's not entirely clear to any of you, please feel free to ask some questions. I believe there's a pop-up there in the bottom of your screen where you can throw some questions out at us, and we'll try our best to respond to those. Strata corporations are sometimes a challenging group of clients to, first of all, to attract. Second of all, to get to know enough about their business so that you know whether you're able to move forward quickly, or they're just fishing to try and find out more information about what it is they think they are looking for. And it's a challenge at times for businesses to try and sort their way through that and figure out who's doing what. What are they asking me for? This is one of the other areas that, because they have to be cautious with the owner's money, they have to be risk averse. By risk averse, one of the cautions that I have for clients is that they need to make sure that they cover their butts, just like we all do in many ways. But we need to ensure, or stratas need to ensure, that they're shifting risk to others as much as they can. And that means making contractors, oftentimes it means making the contractors responsible. And that comes in the language of contract. Again, we're talking about the larger contracts and the larger projects that they may have to undertake. Part of my business is to try and help them avoid those risks and make sure that contractors are taking on responsibility for the things they should be looking after, and that stratas aren't taking on unnecessary risk by acting as the contractor themselves. Oftentimes, stratas, I found, start moving forward with a larger project, and they hire this contractor and they'll hire that contractor and they'll hire another contractor to come in and do things, not really understanding that by doing that, they are becoming a general contractor with all of the responsibilities that the law, including the workplace, WorkSafe BC, applies to that too. And it's a risk that they don't necessarily need to take on. Sometimes it's worthwhile doing it that way. Other times it's certainly not. In fact, most times it's not. So they must be, of necessity, risk averse. The other thing that you need to understand as somebody or a business that's trying to address and deal with strata corporations is that their capital funding process and the approval process can take an inordinate amount of time. Just as an example, I've been working with one client now. I'm going into the third year, and we are finally getting to the point where we are ready to go to tender on a project. It's taken 2 years. It's actually taken a little more than 2 years to actually get through the decision-making process. What is it that they want? And the funding process, getting everybody to pull their funds together to go into what is admittedly a very large project. But there are some very large projects out there to be done. And it's challenging to get the owners to move together and move forward with them. And oftentimes that funding, the special levy type funding, that actually takes approval of 75% of the owners, a minimum of 75%. If they don't gain that kind of cooperation within the owners group, then the motion to approve funding will fail, and they're back to the drawing board, and they have to, go and try it all over again. And if you're the business that's sort of tapping your fingers and marking time, waiting for this thing to happen, you have to understand that stratas cannot move quickly. They simply cannot. Their operating methodology, their business model does not allow them to move quickly and make quick, short, sharp decisions. It's a process that takes time. Councils do not have very much authority, and they have no authority to make large decisions like this. All they can do is gather information, take it back to the owners group as a whole, and present it that way. And, even when somebody or a strata is quickly and ready and prepared, it can still take as much as 3 weeks to a month to actually arrange for a special general meeting. Even saying, okay, well, we're ready to get this done and approved, it can still take 3 weeks to a month before that's going to happen. And that's with a well-organized strata corporation. Lots of them are not that well organized, so it's going to take much, much longer. So patience is the byword for anybody who wants to get involved with a strata corporation. If you're not doing this as an operational matter, if you're working with them on a periodic basis, you must be patient. Because, as that last line says, nothing moves quickly in the strata world. Nothing at all. And if it does, you can, be surprised. In fact, if it does, you may even want to ask the question, have they gone through the process legally, and is council actually doing what it's required to do? There's a hierarchy there that some councils understand, some council members understand very, very clearly. And there are other council members who really don't. They figure, okay, well, I've been elected, so I can make the decision. And the short answer is no, they can't. And so you're dealing with that kind of governmental body, that group of people who has some authority, but not enough to actually make decisions on the larger scale projects that they have to go through. The operational side of things, there's a lot more flexibility, but as long as they have the money in their budget and it's arranged for, this is something, again, the owners have a right to ask for transparency. If something wasn't planned for, then maybe they're doing some things that they're not supposed to be doing. They have not been given the authority to do. So there's this internal working that some business members and some businesses that deal with stratas find very frustrating, and I can understand that. But it is the legal process they have to follow. Seems to me we have a couple of questions here.
Yeah, so John, just to keep it interesting, I'll read out a couple of questions here for everyone. What is the best way to reach out to strata owners or council for new services or solutions? So this would be a business asking this question.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good question because it's one of those things, as I'm sure you're aware, that it's really hard to, phone up a strata corporation or to send a brochure to a strata corporation because there's no listing for them. So VIZOA actually does provide a bit of a platform for our businesses, our business members. We're able to support them with advertising in our bulletin. And, well, in better times, we are able to support them at our seminars when we actually have live seminars where you can actually sit down at a table and talk to the people as they come by. And you can sell your services and wares that way, or at least expose that group of strata owners to your services. It's a very challenging area to get into because there's no easy way to contact them out of the phone book or the web or anywhere else unless you know where you're going to look. So oftentimes you just end up having to wait for them to contact you. So putting your face and name out there and being consistent and being in place around and available to the owners to come and contact you. That's in my experience, that's the most important thing. Again, I've been a business member of VIZOA for 16 years now, and it's a lot of the reason that my business comes the way it does is because I spend time. I've been there for a long time. I'm familiar. I'm, that worn out guy sitting in the corner with cobwebs, hanging all over me because I've been there that long. It's important to be consistent. It's important to maintain a presence by whatever avenue you can. VIZOA can offer that kind of presence and that kind of opportunity to you. Wendy, we got another question there.
Yeah, let's go to the one about the projects first. And I think we're going to need the person to clarify this. They're saying if the project does not require the strata to allocate any budget dollars, does that expedite the process? Well, for the person asking the question, you're going to have to specify, is this an operating expense that happens once a year or more often than once a year, like garbage, window cleaning, carpet cleaning, or are you talking about something that's a larger project that would have to be funded from something outside of that operating budget? So I'm going to give that person maybe a minute to answer that so that because otherwise, John, I don't think you can answer that question.
I don't think I can answer it either. I'm not connecting the dots here.
So let's move to the other question while we give that person a chance to give us more information. And so this is coming from the Strata Council side. Is it a council's responsibility to ask for proof the worker has a WorkSafe BC account in good standing? We're a small strata. Does this mean we can never hire an individual who's looking for work like shoveling snow or doing handyman work?
That's one of the, it's a very common question, and it's a good one. It's something that lots of smaller stratas especially struggle with. What I'm going to suggest to you is that, once again, council must operate in the best interests of all the owners. If you're in a 4-unit strata corporation, well, every owner is a member of council. You just are that way. So you have to operate with a mind towards serving all of your neighbors as well as yourself. So as a single family homeowner, you might choose to hire Joe the handyman or the young teenager down the block to come in and shovel your snow. But you are, by doing that, you are accepting all of the risk involved. If that individual doesn't have WCB coverage, it means that you are liable and responsible for that coverage. If something goes wrong, if there is an accident, it makes you or the Strata Corporation responsible for the consequences of that. Not saying you can't do it, but you have to look at it from that risk management perspective and say, is this the right thing for us to be doing? Is that handyman, is he really qualified to do the job that we need him to do? Are you simply accepting his word for what it is that needs to be done? Or have you got a really good idea of what has to be done and you want to hire a competent contractor to do the job? It's a decision that we all have to go through at one stage or another. It is my best advice that you find contractors who are willing to set themselves up in a professional way, and honestly, that means WCB coverage because it protects you. It protects you and the strata and your owners, your neighbors. And if that business person isn't prepared to do that, then maybe you need to look at somebody else. Hope that helps.
Okay, so we have some clarification, John, on the
yes, I see.
So larger projects, for example, EV chargers, where there are available incentives that could reduce the required upfront cost to zero.
Okay.
I have not found a program yet, folks, that would reduce the cost to zero. And John, I'm going to quickly mention, people can't just change the use of a parking stall.
Yes.
So there is a 3/4 vote involved just for the change of use, let alone any funding.
And let's use EV chargers. This topic is an interesting one because, yes, we all know electric vehicles are coming. They're coming quickly, and they're going to be more and more common. So older buildings are struggling with them, with this a little bit because they don't have the capacity. So they've got a process to go through to even discover whether or not they have the capacity to install a charger. And as Wendy points out, this is a brand new addition to the property, and there has to be a 3/4 vote to approve that. Even just the change of use is an owner's decision. It is not something that council member can phone you up and say, hey, come and install an EV charger for me. And that's true of almost anything. To suddenly say, oh, well, we've got room for a swimming pool in our townhouse complex. Well, okay, but you have to have 75% of the owners decide that they want to spend the money on that swimming pool before you can install it. So once again, stratas have a process to go through before they actually ever get to calling you up and saying, okay, come and do the job. So when they're contacting you and asking you that question, oh, come and give me a quote on putting that swimming pool in. Well, are you actually ready? Have you gone through that entire process? Or are you just asking me to give you a ballpark so you know what kind of number to shoot at during your budget deliberations? I hope that helps.
I have a couple topics, John, I wanted to bring up, and they do fall on the legal side, so I might just preface them a little bit.
Yeah.
Owners obviously have to operate under the Strata Property Act, but what a lot of people don't realize is that it has taken 20 years of court cases to help define different situations. And one thing is what they call the good, better, best. There are many, many court cases where owners have taken their stratas to court and said, well, they should have done the building exterior or the roof or the foundation repairs this way because that was the best way. But technically speaking, a strata does not have to choose the best option. They could pick a terrible option if they wanted to, and not be at fault if it turns out later that it wasn't a very good idea. If they're operating on the advice of a contractor or a service provider, they're relying on information that was reasonable for them in their capacity as regular people. So that's something to keep in mind, that, don't be insulted if they don't choose you as a contractor, and it, in your opinion, it's the best way to do it. They can follow the good, better, best and not be offside the law. I know, John, you'll have probably something to say about that concept as well.
Well, thanks, Wendy. And it's really as simple as it is with any other single family homeowner or any other building owner. Oftentimes it's about the money. All other things being apparently equal, it's always about the money. Here we go back to government. If governments are known for, putting very complex tender documents together and specification documents together, well, there's a reason for that, because they want to set a certain standard, but they're typically going to go for the lowest price. So even though good, better, best is available to a Strata Corporation, typically if they don't know what it is they want exactly, and haven't put that specification and the specification document together so that you know exactly what you're bidding on, and other than that, it's going to be the price that they choose. And it's sometimes challenging. You've got a good product. You can do a great job. You can put a very competent service together, but it doesn't mean that they have to pick you just because you're the best out of all of those things.
Can you touch on the roles and responsibilities of a property manager related to a large project? So I don't know if this question is coming from a council member or from a business.
Yeah, it's strata managers. The position of strata managers are really kind of interesting. Oftentimes, the councils and owners, strata owners, assume that a strata manager is going to do everything for them, including putting, tender documents together and coming up with project specifications and then overseeing the operation of a business. And in fact, that's not the case. Typically, strata managers don't do that kind of thing. If they do, they will charge extra for it. And I try to remind my clients hey, if you want to know what that strata manager is going to do for you, then you should go and look at the contract that you've signed with them, because that will be the limit of the operational and management services that they provide. It's one of those wonderful things. It's a very, very common approach to things. In somebody saying, "Oh, we're not self-managed. We have a property manager, or we have a strata manager." And I like to try to remind people that every single strata, without exception, is a self-managed strata, because even if they have a strata manager, they have to manage the manager. He is simply another contractor. He provides another service to them. And that service is pretty well and clearly defined in the contract that they have between the strata and the strata manager. So more often than not, the strata manager will kind of be, they will present or be available to their strata clients to perhaps help guide them through the process and make sure that they're following the Strata Property Act as they should be, and to provide advice that way. But more often than not, they don't get involved directly with a project. It's not something that they're necessarily comfortable with, and oftentimes I've found they're not qualified to. They don't know enough about the business of contracting and construction and the things of actually maintaining and servicing and upgrading and renewing major systems and buildings. They've watched people go through them. They've watched Strata and their clients go through it, but they're not directly involved. They don't have their fingers in the pie, as it were. I hope that helps. It's kind of a gray area for lots of people, including the stratas that the strata managers are serving.
I have another one, John. Could you just explain the value in having information meetings with the ownership prior to a large project, so that businesses understand the value there in trying to get a big project rolling?
Thanks, Wendy. It's actually a really good point, because I've come across lots of contractors who get actively involved in the project development process, and they do take the time to go to information meetings. Information meetings are those informal meetings that gets a group of owners together, because once again, they often need 75% or more to agree to move forward with any given project, which is one of the things that actually adds that extra time to the decision-making process, because you got to get that 75%, and they have to be given the opportunity to storm and chew and ask questions and argue and fuss and fume, and before that group can come to any kind of consensus. So certainly I encourage my clients to have as many information sessions as they feel necessary. I often advise them to inundate their owners with as much information as possible. Contractors and businesses who want to do business with Strata Corporation, some of them get very involved with that side of the decision-making process to try and help it along. But ultimately, it doesn't mean that you as a business, in investing that time and effort and energy into it, are actually going to come out with anything that corresponds to the business that you wanted in the first place, or you had hoped for in the first place. So it's one of those things. I go back to the idea, are you a consultant or are you a contractor? Because now you're walking that line of consulting rather than actually doing the work. So it's a decision that you have to make as to whether or not you're prepared to invest your time in doing that. It's often something that you don't get paid for because the strata doesn't have the budget for it. They can't pay for your help in that sense. So it's a challenging question, but it's one that you have to answer for yourselves as business people.
John, we have a question about those buildings, those councils or ownership, not always the council's problem, or not always the council's fault if they haven't been given an operating budget to deal with it. But if a council's ignoring the problem, say there's a risk of potential fire because I haven't done something, how does a contractor approach that?
Good morning, Les. It's a challenging thing from a contracting perspective. The number of times that you, I'm sure, have walked into a site and know that they're in trouble. They really need to be doing things, but it's a question of that old adage: you can lead the horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. And that becomes an internal problem for the Strata Corporation itself. And it may be one owner that has to keep, pushing at council to say, hey, you're not doing your job. And this boils down to that same Strata Property Act section, it's section 72, that says that the Strata Corporation must repair and maintain. And I emphasize the term must. They don't have a choice. They really are supposed to be maintaining and repairing the building. And if they're ignoring that, well, ultimately that individual owner who's pushing at them to get the work done does have a legal recourse. But that owner actually ends up taking the Strata Corporation to court to get them to do their job. And there are all kinds of horror stories that have come out over the years where it just ridiculously so that a Strata Corporation has refused to do work that it is really required to do by law, and has had to be forced into doing it. But even that, once again, takes time. So much time, and it's you as in the business that you're there, all you can do is stand there helplessly and let them go through their decision-making process. Unfortunately, there's not a lot that you can do other than give them the facts, tell them what your observations are as a professional, give them as much information as you possibly can, and you have to hand it back to them and let them make the decision. I hope that helps. It can be a very frustrating position to be in. I've been there too, I understand.
John, I'll just add quickly to that too. The contractors will have no idea if there's actually bylaws the other way. So if the owners under the bylaws are responsible for the chimneys or the dryer ducts, sometimes smoke alarms, garage doors, there can be all sorts of things that the bylaws say the owner has to do. And of course, when you have a fire safety issue and the owners have not been doing these things, with gas fireplaces too, it can be very, very frustrating, not just for the contractor, but also for the Strata Council, because their hot water tanks are another one. So you know it needs to be done. The council knows it needs to be done, but it's very difficult to force people to do it when they're not taking their responsibility seriously.
Yes, very much so. There is that misunderstanding. It's really quite astounding, the number of people who will move into a strata, but they'll never read the strata's bylaws and the rules, and are offended because the council has to try to enforce a bylaw. This is that internal politicking that I was talking about a little earlier. Bylaws can be set up so that it can go both ways. In the case where, as Wendy mentions, hot water tanks in townhouses often have individual hot water tanks, and even condominium blocks. These days, each unit will have its own hot water tank. Well, if that tank fails and starts to leak, everybody's involved. Guaranteed, the strata is going to be dragged into it, whatever happens. So it's something that I encourage owners to consider in changing their bylaws if they've got individual hot water tanks, that they actually make the Strata Corporation, by bylaw, responsible for maintenance and repair and replacement. And that way, the whole thing is taken out of an individual owner's hands. Stratics get to organize a complete sweep of hot water tanks at the end of their warranty periods. So brand new tanks are involved. They get a great deal because they're buying a dozen hot water tanks and having that plumber come in and replace them all. So there's invariably economies of scale in getting really good deals to do all of that work. And it actually serves the strata really, really well because they can assure their insurers are aware that, nope, we change our hot water tanks on a regular basis. So it satisfies the insurance companies, and I think most of you are aware that the strata insurance industry is a little crazy right now and has got everybody just really quite nervous about where their premiums are going to go and what kind of insurance they can get. Once again, the Strata Property Act requires a Strata Corporation to insure for full replacement value. This is the law. They must do this. They don't have a choice. They can't just say, "Oh no, we're not going to insure." So it's very important to be aware of that kind of thing. And as Wendy has pointed out, bylaws can be changed, and bylaws apply to individual stratas. It's not a blanket thing. There are the standard bylaws, and many stratas operate that way, but bylaws can be changed and often are. So in doing that kind of thing, one has to be careful to understand just a little bit about what their maintenance bylaws cover and how they affect the operation.
John, I only have one more comment to make, and that is for contractors to understand. There have been some cases where individual owners who are not on council, who have no authority, have hired contractors. I'm not talking about large projects here. I'm talking about coming down and cutting down a tree.
Yes.
Or fixing a fence or something that they're passionate about, but they haven't got any authority from their council.
Yes.
So obviously you want to avoid that, but there have been cases where the contractor, if they reasonably relied on the fact that they thought that person had authority, the contract might stand. You know, the council will get really upset about it. But from the contractor's point of view, if the consent was implied, you had no reason to believe that that person didn't have authority to tell you to do something. It's quite possible that the contract will be fine. But of course, if you have any doubt at all, if you haven't dealt with somebody for 4 years and you're not sure if they actually are still on council and still have authority, just check.
The other occasion, and I think one of the next question that's come up here is a prime example of this, is that as a contractor, you're working on a site and an owner comes up and says, hey, gee, can you do this? Can you do this? And can you do that? Or will you do this for me? And the short answer is, well, I probably can do that for you, but you need to talk to council about me doing that for you, because the person that I've been taking direction from is so-and-so, and they're the council representative, and I'm working for council. I have to take orders from them. I can't work for you on their behalf. So making sure that you're accepting responsibility from somebody in authority, and that, yes, if you've been working with the same person for 2 or 3 years, well, it doesn't mean that they maintain their council authority. Councils change on a pretty regular basis. So council members switch in and out. Oftentimes they'll step down and away for a couple of years, and then they'll step back into it. And quite often those individuals will still have a very strong feeling about how the strata should be operating, and they may step over a boundary here in asking for certain things, and when they really have no authority to. So my only advice there is, once you have assured that you are working with a council member, it's then you can move forward. But always have one contact person that you know is on council. They're the contact that you know you can rely on, and redirect other owners to. When an owner comes up and says, well, gee, I'd sure like you to do this, well, I'd be happy to do that for you, no problem at all. But would you please check with that person, because they're the ones that I have to take direction from. It's easy to just say, sure. The other part of it, and smelly diesel generators close to another resident's window, well, that again comes back to that council contact, that person who the contractor is responsible for and to be overseeing what that contractor is doing, and saying, hey, wait a minute, that person deserves to have peace and quiet and enjoyment. So can we see if there's not a place where that generator can be moved to? Contract management is another thing that stratas are not necessarily well placed to do. Overseeing and making sure that the work is done the way it's supposed to be. And well, it doesn't always work in the best advantage. Let's leave it at that, shall we?
Well, John, I want to thank you so much for doing this webinar today. It was fantastic. We will have a recording of it up on YouTube and our website within a day or two. And all the attendees today will be getting a follow-up email with a link to our website so that you have access to the slides and the video. And we will have the question and answer up there within a few days.
Thank everybody for joining in and asking some cool questions. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.